I am the Philosophical Bachelor, and today I want to give a meta-historical analysis of Enchantment versus Disillusionment. The following is a work of theory fiction, a text I prepared for a fictitious conference which is upcoming in March and April this year. Memorandum tabled by the sovereign nation of Enchantment for the consideration of the Congress. Enchantment versus Disillusionment, a meta-historical analysis. We begin in wonder. While we do not know much about the primitive human being, we can imagine them to be intellectually not so different from babies and young children. All three groups are deficient in knowledge, but as conscious beings are insatiably curious to find out about their worlds. According to Aristotle, we cannot help it as it is our nature as thinking beings. All men by nature desire to know, he writes in the first lines of his Metaphysics. Our desire to know causes us to wonder about things. We are puzzled by what we encounter, which provides the impetus for us to find out, to reason, to investigate, in short, to philosophize. So let us imagine the condition of a primitive person. Like us moderns, primitive people experience sensations through their sensory apparatus, but have no words to tell one another about it. This is a time before language is invented. Even seeing another person is novel, not to mention attempting to communicate with this other being through hand signs or grunts. Everything is novel. Somehow communication happens. At some point, people are no longer alone. They may be a couple, maybe a village, gathered together for safety against the elements. Maybe. We do not know. We can only speculate based on scanty bits of archaeological evidence, if there are even any to be had. Nonetheless, proto-language must have arisen. After a day of hunting for food, gathering berries or nuts or whatever they have so far discovered to be edible, night descends. They lay down, peering into the darkness. Fire has not been discovered, has not yet arrived from Prometheus. The moon and the stars are the only light. They wonder about those. They invent stories about these little bright points embedded in the dark canvas before them. They try to explain what puzzles them. As these stories get told and retold, they solidify into myth. Myth is a staging post for knowledge, a kind of proto-knowledge. Even the lover of myth is in a sense a lover of wisdom, writes Aristotle. In seeking to understand, our primitives cook up myths. They need to feed their mind just like they need to feed their bodies. In their ignorance, the world was a magical place, an enchanted place. Yet as they wondered about things and philosophized, as they discovered the causes of things and events, it must mean that they lose this feeling of magic. There is a price to pay for understanding. If one is going to eat of the tree of knowledge, then one has to be prepared to be kicked out of the Garden of Eden. It is not Santa Claus that comes down the chimney to leave the presents, and it is not the tooth fairy who leaves behind a coin. But is it really so bad to know that it is your parents that are behind both acts of love? In fact, is it not better to know that there are real people who care enough to shower you with affection than make-believe beings who cannot possibly give a damn about you since they simply do not exist? Aristotle tells us that we are in a better state when we know the truth. Aristotle's brief account is itself a myth. We have hardly any knowledge of the primitive human being today, and it is unlikely Aristotle fared better during the 4th century BCE. Nonetheless, like most myths, it bears some resemblance to the truth. Short of exact knowledge, it may serve to explain to us what we want to know. The world was a mysterious place, and the more we knew, the less mysterious it became. Once we peered behind the magician's curtain, the tricks are just not as wonderful, not as magical, as they had seemed before we knew. We gain knowledge but become disheartened. Wisdom exacts its toll. 2 millennia later, Auguste Comte's Meta-History of Philosophy in his essay Philosophical Considerations on the Sciences and Scientists still echoes Aristotle's. According to Comte, human knowledge acquisition proceeds in 3 stages. the theological, the metaphysical, and finally the positive. We begin at the theological stage, where we make sense of phenomena by invoking supernatural beings. We then proceed to the metaphysical stage, when we explain things through abstract entities, and finally we get to the stage of positive science, where we have laws of relations as explanations but not first and final causes. The term positive used here is not opposed to the negative, but the normative. The normative is how things should be, while the positive is about how things actually are. To find out how things actually are, we rely on observation and empirical methods. Comte notes that in this most advanced stage of positive science, we are forbidden to inquire about first and final causes and have to regard all these big questions as necessarily insoluble for man. I supplement this last point with an example from the positive science of modern physics. My example is gravity. During the 17th century, Isaac Newton gave us his law of universal gravitation, which accurately calculates the force of gravitational attraction between bodies. But how does this force get transmitted in the absence of a medium? Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, a contemporary of Newton, questions how this occult action can occur from a distance without contact between bodies. The world had to wait more than 2 centuries for Einstein to propose space-time curvature to get a causal explanation of the phenomenon. In Comte's History of Knowledge, we began by being able to explain everything, but are unable to predict anything. We end by being able to predict everything, but are unable to explain anything. We know today how a butterfly flies, but not why it flies. A generation or two after Comte, Brentano presents a new line in his meta-analysis of the history of philosophy, the history of ideas and knowledge. Brentano sees the first stage as one of pure inquiry, a pursuit of knowledge for its own sake. This is a stage of progress followed by 3 distinct stages of decline. The first stage of decline is where the pure scientific interest of the preceding stage gets sullied by practical considerations. The second stage is where skepticism develops over whether we can even have any knowledge at all. To overcome this skepticism, we turn to mysticism, a third stage of decline, where new concepts and entities are created in the hope of bringing us further on the path of truth. Unlike Comte, Brentano supports his thesis with specific examples for the ancient, medieval, and modern era. In the ancient era, Plato and Aristotle marks the first stage of progress, where we do not seek knowledge for the sake of any other advantage, but as the man is free, we say, who exists for his own sake and not for another's, so we pursue philosophy as the only free science, for it alone exists for its own sake. We see during this time a systemization of knowledge, perfecting hypotheses partly by an enlargement of the scope of investigation and partly through confronting new questions. After Aristotle, the great systemizer of the ancient era, the pursuit of knowledge began its first stage of decline. The Stoics and Epicureans, in their practical quest of trying to figure out how we should act and what we should do, subjugated their more fundamental work in logic and physics to ethics. Interestingly, in this stage, more people are attracted to philosophy, such that Epicurus had incomparably more followers than did Plato or Aristotle, observes Brentano. As the school became less profound, so its breadth increased. The second stage of decline came with Plato's Academy taking a skeptical turn under the leadership of Carneades around 155 BCE. This is the man who went to Rome and argued publicly for justice on one day, only to argue against it on the next, both times very convincingly. You can imagine the confusion and disturbance he caused the Romans. What did this man really believe, or did he believe in nothing? Pyrrhonian skepticism predates Carneades, but the movement really began to take hold around 200 AD, in the time of Sextus Empiricus, who left us the best extant account of Pyrrhonism. The third stage of decline in the ancient era saw the Neoplatonists, who postulated mystical intelligible entities such as the One, which is not quite the creationist God of the Abrahamic religions, but a singular metaphysical principle from which all things emanated. Brentano goes on to provide a similar account for the medieval and modern periods, though he did not explain how the third stage of decline in the preceding era led to a revival once again of the first stage of progress, embodied by Thomas Aquinas and René Descartes, respectively. However, he does hint that the increasing decadence of the end of each period led finally to reform and a return to former bases of pure theoretical pursuit, such as the Arab rediscovery of Aristotle in the medieval period giving rise to Thomism. Aristotle and Comte sees our knowledge development as progressive. We leave the myths behind, considering them interesting but flawed fairy tales as we progress up the epistemological ladder towards increasingly powerful theories which approximate closer and closer to the truth. As you read these accounts, you may find yourself agreeing with them, this image of progress being so deeply entrenched in the modern psyche. We see fields of philosophical speculations maturing and founding concrete scientific disciplines in their own right. For instance, modern physics, chemistry, biology, as well as in the social sciences such as economics. Newton considered himself a natural philosopher, entitling his work Philosophia Naturalis Principia Mathematica, while Adam Smith, the father of modern economics, was known as a philosopher. Indeed, Comte's intention in his philosophical considerations was to argue how sociology had, in his time, reached such a state of maturity as to be ripe to become a positive science, establishing him as the father of sociology. Brentano gives the lie to this monotonically progressive view by showing how the course of knowledge never did run smooth, with progress followed by long declines finally resulting in mysticism. Indeed, at today's frontiers of physics, we can observe for ourselves how theoretical research in quantum mechanics and astrophysics has shifted from experimental rigor to dabbling in the realm of metaphysical speculation with theories such as quantum indeterminacy, superstring theory, and parallel universes, which are all but empirically untestable. Following Karl Popper's criteria of falsification, demarcating science and pseudoscience, it would seem that some of the most advanced work pursued by leading scientific institutions today cannot even be considered to be science. Is a human need for enchantment what draws Brentano's intellectual movement to its mystical apogee? Brentano considers this mysticism a decline, but it is not a reversion. There is no going back to ignorance and superstition once the scales have fallen from our eyes. We cannot return to believing in Santa Claus once we realize he is a fiction, well intended as it may be. Instead, a charitable reading of Brentano's account, charitable to humankind, not to Brentano, suggests that when we approach what seems to be the limits of our knowledge, we resort to the mystical, a different and higher mysticism from the primitive human beings, as a way of trying to get further. This is not so different from Aristotle's depiction of the primitive's wonder, resulting in myth as the starting point of philosophy. Where are we today? Alienated by technological accelerationism and capitalist exploitation, accompanied by a decline in adherence to faith traditions, cultural decadence, disappointment in democratic politics, and scientism, is humanity at a stage where we are in need for a re-enchantment? Each of these disillusionments will require its own type of re-enchantment, but I want to conclude by giving one example on the scientistic tendency towards physicalist reductionism to illustrate what a re-enchantment might look like in the sciences. Decades-long efforts in cognitive neuroscience have not yet yielded answers to the hard problem of consciousness. Echoing Edmund Husserl, would not a parallel acceptance and investigation into the existence of the immaterial, alongside the incumbent physicalist approach, provide a sensible way forward? Would not a reconsideration of dualism be an apt return to Descartes, whom Brentano considered to be the leading thinker of the progressive stage of the modern era? If we can, according to Comte, give up the quest for first and final causes in the positive sciences in exchange for the certainty of laws and relations, accepting them as brute facts, why should we not likewise accept the existence of the immaterial also as brute? Thank you.